Okay, Mr. Mayor, you are good to start the meeting.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone. How's that? Special Council Education and Training meeting today on Tuesday, September 22nd. Electronic meeting pursuant to Section 238, 3.3 of the Municipal Act. And due to efforts, as we know, to contain the spread of COVID-19 and to protect our individuals, city facilities will not be open and public to attend council and committee meetings until further notice. And so with that, we are doing our meeting in a different way. And I would ask for a motion to adopt agenda of the meeting, please. I have Councillor Sovitz. Somebody else want to call it out? I can only see one person. Other members of council, please.
I'll second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't sure who all was here. Any comments? If not, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries fine.
In favor.
Thank you. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, members of council? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk. And at this point in time, our education and training meeting with respect to the council's strategic plan 2020-22, 20 to 22. Yeah, I had trouble with that one. So at this point in time, we have an introduction and open remarks by our CAO and chief or city manager. How did I stumble over that? Miss Mary Ann Dempster. In case you don't know who you are.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Thank you for joining today's Special Council Education and Training meeting regarding the council strategic plan. 2020 has been an unprecedented year, bringing with it the need for organizations and communities to pivot, to redirect resources, and to think differently. It's no different for the city of Richmond Hill. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we have changed the way we deliver services and even how we interact with the community and each other. It is not business as usual, and that is why we embarked on a process to develop a 2-year plan. In August and September, Rebecca Southerns and our staff met with you to listen to your views on the vision for Richmond Hill and priorities we need to address, particularly in light of the incredible changes brought about by COVID-19. We also asked the community about their views on priorities the city should address for the remaining term of council. Council sets the vision and policy direction for the municipality, and together with staff, the executive leadership team determine how to bring that vision to action and monitor results. Our goal is to develop a document that contributes to a shared set of expectations and clarity around where we can prioritize our efforts to best serve the Richmond Hill residents and businesses. I want to emphasize that our efforts today are to focus on priorities and directions for the next 2 years. We will work with council at the start of the next term to embark on a longer-term community strategic plan. Today, Rebecca will be sharing what she heard at the individual meetings with each of you, as well as the feedback from the community. And she will facilitate the discussion that will contribute to a document that we anticipate to be completed by the end of the year. Rebecca will also develop a business planning tools for the city's leadership team, which reflect council's priorities. Rebecca brings a wealth of experience to this process. She is insightful and a high-energy collaborative strategist. She is a world-class facilitator who has served as a trusted advisor to hundreds of mission-driven organizations in Canada and internationally for more than 20 years. Rebecca is a skilled communicator with a particular gift for helping leaders make wiser decisions faster. She specializes in facilitating strategic planning, stakeholder engagement, strong governance, and effective teamwork, and is the author of Nimble, Off Script but Still on Track, a coaching guide for responsive facilitation and sightline. Strategic plans that gather momentum, not dust. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to start the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Nice to see all of you as a group. I really enjoyed my one-on-one conversations with each of you, and I'm glad to be able to continue that today. If you are able, councillors, and Mr. Mayor, to turn on your video, please do. If you're not in a situation where you can, that's fine. But if you are able to and haven't yet, it would be great to be able to see all of you. And welcome to those that are observing here today as well from the executive leadership team and other folks in city staff. So thanks very much for joining us. As mentioned, we're going to start off with a small educational segment and feedback on what I heard in the 2 parts leading up to this meeting, which were comprised of my individual conversations with each of the members of council, and then with the community survey that in fact just closed yesterday. And so we will give you a bit of a summary of that, and we'll continue our more detailed analysis because we had great feedback on that, which has meant that we've been able to do an initial analysis, but we'll certainly be going deeper into that. So what I'd like to do initially is just to make sure that you're comfortable with the ways in which we will be using the various tools that are available to us online. We're going to use 2 of them today. The main one will be the chat. And so that's the place for questions. You're welcome to put a Q before things and just type in comments and questions. It's also a great place for there to be kind of additional interaction going on there. Please note that, as we mentioned in the pre-work, the chat is not available on the live stream, but it is available to the public upon Freedom of Information request. And so we would ask that you would treat that accordingly. We are therefore recording the session because it is a public session, and that will also be helpful to us for documentation purposes so that I'm not frantically taking notes while we're having this conversation. But I would encourage you to use that chat. And then a couple of other times we will be inviting you to weigh in on polls and that kind of thing so that we can gather your continued feedback in various ways through the course of these next couple of hours. Really today is about synthesis of disparate opinions into not a finalized plan at all. We will be doing wordsmithing and editing later, but this is really about making sure that we have all of the ingredients we'll need from you to be able to feed back to you what we've heard, and you can say, you know, yes or no in terms of how close we came to getting that right. And so with that, I'd love to, I'll share my screen with you and we'll get started. In terms of what you're looking at on your screen, you can spotlight this and see it big, and you can also, I hope, see the other folks that are participating in the call in the gallery view today. So what we're looking at here initially will be, sorry, I'm just fussing with making sure that I can actually see the view that you can see. So what I'm looking for today from you is really an opportunity to feed back to us what you heard from what we heard from you from the conversations we had. And the first thing I want to start with then is an acknowledgement that we had a range of understandings of the task itself. And so in some ways, what I want to start with is how we're going to choose, therefore, to frame the task for the purposes of today's conversation in the light of the fact that each of you came at it from you know, understandably a different perspective. So I've highlighted some of the questions on the initial slide here in terms of where we saw some, where we had some conversations and where we actually saw some divergence around that. So one of them is whether we need a strategic plan at all. And the way we're framing that for today is that we need a 2-year action plan to take you to the end of council's current term. Is it a new plan or a continuation of the previous one that was built as a 25-year plan 11 years ago? Range of opinions on that. Certainly an appetite at this point for some measure of refresh of what you've had previously. The next piece is, to what extent is strategy development a council or a staff responsibility? And as the city manager and CAO mentioned to us just now, we're looking to council to set high-level direction, and then staff will take that and develop the metrics that would go with that and various business management tools that we can then use as a dashboard or scorecard of sorts to bring back to you, but also as hopefully a lens through which you will be making the various decisions that come across your desk over the remaining term of council. So it is very much a both and kind of exercise, but that we are in fact looking to you to set the course for the staff. We chatted about whether Richmond Hill actually needs to drive a particular vision or create some measure of differentiator for the municipality. Various views on that. Some of you were initiating that yourselves before I asked. Some of you had a range of opinions in response to my question around that. And some of you said, no, actually, I prefer to shape my role basically in response to requests that come my way from residents. And so it's linked to the next question of should council work toward a shared agenda or be making decisions vote by vote? And so all of this kind of folds into this idea of the extent to which you will be willing collectively to make a strategic document stick. So we can talk about the content of it, but follow-up will be the extent to which you choose to make decisions in alignment with that conversation or with that document. We talked a little bit about the extent to which you have a range of opinions on council as to how much to elicit community feedback and community input, in a sense, between elections. For some of you, the election cycle is the way that you do that primarily. And for others, you talked about how your agenda feels to you like it is set on a much tighter cadence than that in your conversations with your ward residents and businesses. And we also had some really interesting conversations about the extent to which you want to frame this planning exercise as basically getting a leg up on neighboring municipalities with which you see yourselves as competing largely, or whether this is kind of a one piece of a larger regional, perhaps, or even larger ecosystem plan for you. So in the midst of all of that, what we can say with some certainty is that, as I mentioned, it's up to council to set those high-level directions and staff will work on how to deliver them. There is broad agreement that an explicit set of priorities will in fact help you get more done and will give you what I'm calling here more defensible decision-making, meaning you can at least come back to your residents and say, we made this decision because council had decided to make XYZ a priority over these next 2 years. In real life, all of you commented that 2 years will be very short, and in fact, probably shorter than 2 years because, as you well know, the campaign process will start sooner than that as you prepare for the next election 2 years from now. And a number of initiatives are in fact already underway. And so you need to plan accordingly. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you have room to change or play with or discretion over and what you don't over the next 2 years. But what I would say is that all of you were in agreement that we need a plan that matches the time frame. That although some of you may have loftier, longer term aspirations for the city, that for now we're looking at a 2-year priority list. All of you mentioned obviously that COVID management, COVID recovery should be a prominent focus, to the point that some of you said you thought that actually this document should be a COVID recovery plan, and you may direct us to in a sense call it that. I would say that there were disparate opinions about what COVID management and recovery would entail in detail, but the need for that to be top of mind clearly was not debatable at this point. Many of you mentioned that the city is in a strong financial position. And when I say relatively strong, I actually mean relative to comparable municipalities that many of you cited, that you feel good about that and that you don't want to lose ground in that arena over the next couple of years. And that it came out quite clearly that this plan needs to not only be about the content of it, so the what is in it, but in fact, how you choose to roll it out, how you choose to work together in doing that. And certainly there were comments made about a range of perspectives on your willingness and ability, frankly, to make that happen cooperatively. So whether and how you choose to do that is still an open question, but I wanted to highlight it for you as an element that came up in the conversations fairly frequently. So we've got a number of sort of common ground places on which to build today, and lots of variation inside them. So just what I want to start with in addition to that content is kind of what I call, the reason I called it here Strategic Planning 101. I think it's helpful to frame the task in some ways to say, here are some elements I'd like you to be thinking about as you engage in the more specific discussions we're going to have. I'm going to start with the whole pie diagram. Does it feel like Trivial Pursuit? That's kind of the look here. I'll start with those elements and then explain the other one. You need to be thinking about aspiration. And I mentioned this around having some variation of how aspirational this plan can and will be, partly because of the short time frame, partly because some of you see your role as casting a vision for your city and others see you as being primarily responsive to your constituents. And therefore, a more, I would say reactive, but in a positive way, responsive perhaps, orientation would lead you to say, you know, it's not really about us being particularly aspirational, it's about us being responsive and efficient and seeing those in a little bit of tension in the conversations that I had. But what you do need to do at this point is say, how bold, how ambitious, how visionary are we looking to be together? And so therefore that is the ambition piece, is to say, what are we going after as the aspiration, and how big and how fast would be the other. The pace and magnitude of that becomes really important. So it would be useful for you to have some sense of that level of ambitiousness, I guess. This says attitude. It should say altitude. It's missing a loop on the second L. The altitude of that of the plan is also really important. That council stays quite high level, but low enough in your altitude to be meaningful. So part of what I'm going to ask you to do today is to stay at the right altitude so that we're not talking about things maybe as broad as quality of life that any of us could picture in many, many different ways, but we're also not going initiative by initiative in a really tactical way. We're kind of at a high middle place. And it's really important that we keep that altitude correct. Also important that the alignment line up both horizontally and vertically. So the goals that you set for your staff team, they will be paying attention to make sure that the activities they're going to do line up with that. And similarly, that if you plan one initiative over here and another one over here, different departments perhaps in the city, that they need to be talking to each other as well. That is a staff responsibility, but it also rests with you, councillors, to say, make sure you're not, in a sense, giving contradictory instructions to your staff team. And then application would be the final one here. And that is, this needs to be impactful and doable. So we're holding that lens as well to say, could this be applied in real life? The reason that achievability is there, but off to the side, is this. I'll give you a bit of a story. It's an imaginary story based on a real life situation. I imagine the meeting at which Amazon decided to do 24-hour delivery using drones and other delivery systems. And I wasn't at the meeting, surprisingly, but I would imagine that somewhere around that table, somebody said, we can't do that. Can't do that. Like, there's no way that we could deliver stuff all over the world on a 24-hour turnaround. And maybe each of you has had that experience where you've ordered something from Amazon and you swear it was hiding in the bushes in front of your house for the speed at which they were able to get. I had it happen with a meat thermometer. It honestly showed up in 4 hours. And it's like, where was that thing before it showed up in my mailbox 4 hours later? But I can imagine people at that table saying, can't be done. And so if they had set achievability as their only criterion for good decisions, they would have put that idea off the table right away because it seemed probably ridiculous. And yet almost anything is achievable if you were to say, or anyone were to say, well, if we throw enough resources at that, enough attention and time and money and energy and smarts and whatever, lots can happen. So I want to suggest that achievability be held as a criteria here too, but loosely, because achievability is really a resource allocation question. And so if something is utterly important to you, you will make it achievable by the attention you give it within limits. Whereas if you start with achievability as your initial table stakes, I'll say, you might put things off the table that actually should be on the table in order for you to be an aspirational, compelling visionary council. So these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about as we embark on this today. And I would encourage you to do the same, to really be thinking about through what lenses are you as planners today thinking about this. So what I would like to do is, I'm just going to run the first, let me just stop sharing here and I'll get back to our polling, and we're going to do the first of our opportunities for you to give us some input. So this first poll is basically asking you the question, to what extent is your work plan over the next 2 years already set versus being open to change? Because if you feel like it's already laid out and you've already got this already set, then we don't have a lot of decisions to make today. We just have to confirm something. But if you feel like there's some space to play with this, then it's a different kind of conversation. So curious what you think about that. Can you vote in that poll, please? Do you see the poll, first of all? Yeah, okay. Great.
How do you vote?
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. Ryan is reminding me, please only councillors vote. So all of you that are on the call, we're actually inviting only the councillors to vote in this at the moment. So thank you for those of you that are observing and staying in your observing role, since I can't see who's voting. Let's have a look. So far, we've heard from about a third. Oh, no wonder it'll say, yeah, no problem. I've got 6 of you having voted so far. If I can get the other 3 councillors to cast a vote.
I don't know. To what extent?
Trying to get a sense of your understanding of, you know how when you deal with some budgets and people want you to cut budgets and you're like, you know what, there's really only 20% of our budget that has any discretion in it. The rest is all fixed. I feel like that with this is to what extent do we have room to maneuver here from your perspective? All right, so we have 8 people voting here. So we'll end that poll and I just want you to see the mix that we have here. So the mix here, as you can see, is that 38% of you feel that we do have some space to play with. And when you add that together with the other 25% times 2 above it, we have 88% of you feeling like we do have some room to maneuver here, or sorry, feeling that we don't. So in some ways, I'm hoping that you've read this the same way I'm reading it, that you're saying that it's based, a lot of it is already set. So there's a lot of things that are already in place and we'll make sure to surface those today, but that we've got a little bit of room to maneuver in some things. And so, and there's also kind of a range of opinion here about that. So I just want you to be able to hold that in mind as we move forward.
That was as clear as mud could be.
Did that feel awkward? I'm sorry about that. Let me say it again.
The language in the future ones are a little more clear.
More clear. I apologize for that.
And I can see a number of my colleagues completely perplexed by what you thought you were trying to say, but it didn't come out very clearly.
All right, so I'll tell you what, let's do it a different way. Thank you for that. In the chat, if you think you have a lot of room to maneuver, like we basically, I don't want to say you're starting from a blank slate, nobody ever is. But if you feel like you've got lots of discretion, lots of play, you can type lots in the chat right now. And if you say, this makes no sense to me, but it's already set, then that would be the other option, is to say very little. So if you think you have lots of room to maneuver, you can confirm that vote by saying lots, and you could put very little instead if you prefer. And you're welcome to respond either to me or to everyone. That's up to you. You can, for those of you, maybe I should have said that clearer. In the chat, you can control who you are speaking to in the chat. So you'll notice that with a blue bar near the bottom. When you go into the speech bubble of the chat, you can say things to everyone or just to individual people in the room, myself included. So if that was feeling unclear, you're welcome to confirm it that way. What I'd like to do now is I want to run through what we heard from a topic point of view. So we're really transitioning now into priority setting. And I'll give you an opportunity to engage with this more than we have up to this point, but I want you to have a clear sense of the kinds of topics that bubbled to the top. And the way I did this was to do it by repetition, really, to say which topics came up most often, because I did ask the same set of questions to each of you. through those conversations. So let me share my screen with you again, and we'll walk through some of the things that were heard most frequently. You'll see here that what I've done initially is on this first slide, we have a list of items that were mentioned to me by at least 4 out of the 9 of you. Some of them it was more than that. No one item probably got more than about 6, I think. But these are the things that were mentioned most often. What I would say about these is that what you had to say about them varied. Okay, so I'm just surfacing what the issues were, but not necessarily your suggested way forward with them. The first one that was mentioned most often had to do with transit connectivity. And many of you in this context were very much in agreement, singing the praises of Richmond Hill as being this connecting hub for, I think you said 5 different kinds of public transit, and being quite unique in that. And that is something that you really want to leverage. And so what I'd love to do at the moment is just pause for a moment and ask you in the chat, is what is it about that transit strength that Richmond Hill has? Oops, sorry. Well, I'm just going to put that in the chat for you to see, for all of you to see it. This is a bit of a placeholder. What is it that you would say? I guess my question is, what about it? Because we know that transit has regional links, has provincial responsibilities to it. What is it about that transit connectivity in Richmond Hill that you see as this council's responsibility? What's your verb that you do with transit? Can you type that in the chat? What about, like many of you said, hooray, we've got terrific transit connectivity. What does that have to do with your strategy? Can you spell that out for me in the chat or out loud? I'm happy to hear from a couple of you. What's your role when it comes to transit? Is it about communications and singing its praises? Is it about advocacy? Is it about, I don't know, enhancing connectivity? What is it that's your job when it comes to transit locally? Because many of you said that that was a very big deal for you.
Nothing to do.
Nothing to do? Okay, that's fair. Is that true? I don't know. I'm actually asking the question quite seriously, because one of the things we need to make sure is that the things in the plan are within your sphere of influence and within your scope of practice, yeah? It's the region's responsibility, not the municipality's, right? So given that, is there anything for you to do or not?
Well,
What are some of the things that you do feel are yours to do around this transit connectivity piece? Because honestly, if there isn't anything, that we just don't put it in the plan, and that's fine. But my sense is that it was very important to you. So I'm curious in what ways.
if I can add something else, there's 3 members of council that sit on the regional council, which manage the that's who manages that type of transit. So other than that, I don't know. There's often our residents will call in and say, something's wrong, something happened, or wasn't happy with it, and then we refer it back to. So it's not our department in Richmond Hill.
Okay. Can I hear from others? Is it the fact that it is not a municipal responsibility, does that mean that it does not figure in your plan, or do you say something about it specifically? So
I think perhaps there must have been a mistake in your math when you were adding this up, and maybe this was the least important of the group, because I can't imagine you would get 4+ councillors saying leveraging multiple transportation connections is the biggest priority this council has. So I think maybe if you go back to the worksheet, maybe it got transposed, just a technical error.
no, in fact, it didn't. And I did double check it for that reason. This was actually the most repeated thing when I asked you, it wasn't necessarily saying we want this to be #1 priority in our plan, but when I said, when you describe your vision and responsibility in Richmond Hill, what kinds of things are very important for you to emphasize as a municipal council, this in fact came up a lot, which I actually found surprising for the reason you're hinting at. Because it's not, we know that it's not in your official practice.
Given the lack of input, we should maybe go on to the next item because you're not getting any real uptake there. And in the interest of time.
Okay.
Can I add to that? I think maybe with this one.
Well, how many people responded? So has everybody responded, or who has not responded? How many people have responded to your inquiry before we move on?
Responded to which inquiry, Councilor Munch? This particular question? I heard from three of you, I think.
Did you? Oh, I responded. I'm surprised others didn't.
Responded where?
In your chat.
Yeah, thank you. So right now I've heard from Councilor Munch, Councilor Stilovitz, Councilor West, and then orally from one of you.
Rebecca, can I just add something? I think maybe the confusion is that one of the biggest things happening in Richmond Hill is the subway is coming.
Yep.
To Richmond Hill Center. And that's very important for multiple facets. It may be the region's responsibility to facilitate that, but we play an active role from a secondary planning perspective and providing the information in a timely manner. So that could be where potentially the interest was on the subway.
Totally makes sense to me. I guess maybe let me frame it a different way. If your plan were to say, given that the subway is coming, given that Richmond Hill is this connectivity hub for transit, our municipal council therefore should what? What's the end therefore for you about this moment in time around transit for this community?
Rebecca, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I guess the difficulty I'm having with that is that transit and transportation are clearly incredibly important for Richmond Hill and many other GTA communities at this present time. But I guess the problem I'm having with considering this at this moment is that it's a given. It's an absolute motherhood and apple pie type of statement there and it permeates our everyday life. I mean, we have obligations as a municipality to build appropriately for transit and the transportation infrastructure that's being invested in. But I think the problem is, the way I see a strategic planning exercise is that a strategic plan, in my view, should reflect the not necessarily foundational things that we need to do for our community and make our community great, not just good. And so I see transportation and a number of other questions actually that were in the survey, quite frankly, as not things that I would expect to see in a strategic plan. They're just givens. And so that's maybe part of what I'm having trouble with. And I'm wondering if maybe that's some of my colleagues are having trouble with that too.
Fair enough. And I think one of the dilemmas in any kind of strategic plan, but particularly at the municipal level, is the extent to which your core business, maybe your legislated requirements, that kind of thing, are strategic or not. You know, people are not, you know, depending on your level of municipality, are you going to put water and garbage and traffic and, you know, all that kind of stuff in your plan? And yet there are some communities that say, we have to do this, but we're going to be really strategic about how. So that's what I'm trying to hear today. Please hear me that I'm not trying to sell an idea here. I'm feeding back to you what I heard so that you can feed back to me what you want it to say in the plan about it, including in this example, maybe nothing. But I am seeing some other examples here where, for example, Councilor Munch, as you would see in the chat, is talking about housing affordability, sociodiversity opportunity. Maybe it's an overall concept of city building, for example. I'm not really sure. Does anyone want to say anything more about transit, or would you like to move on?
Well, I think my position on this strategic plan is that when you have an investment vehicle from any party, in this case the province, putting in $8 billion, then you have a region that says that they're going to make transit a priority and have invested $2.9 billion, $500 million in Richmond Hill. I mean, those are huge investments into our community from others that I would argue that we should be, as Councillor West was saying, it's a given. Well, we should leverage that. I would argue that many municipalities would likely say this is good news, and how are we going to really benefit from those massive investments? And are we going to take a reactive role, or are we going to be taking a proactive role? And I think that's where some parties, there's differences of opinion from in any topic, including this. But I would hope that we would be supportive in a very proactive way, as opposed to just wait and see.
Mhm.
So I hope it's part of our strategic plan, because it's a 10-year to 15-year plan.
Does anyone else, sorry, go ahead. Your Zoom thing says RPN, and I'm so sorry because I don't think we've met in person, so I don't know what to call you.
It's Councillor Pirelli.
Thanks, I thought so. So we spoke on the phone, but I didn't see your face, so I wanted to make sure that's who you were. Hi, nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is my assistant's laptop. Unfortunately, I couldn't sign in on my account. I was having technical difficulty.
No worries.
I'm looking at your list here. Transit, economic development, value, place people want to live. I think it's always been part of our plan as a municipality to do these types of things, to improve on all of this list. And we can sit here and talk about all of these things till the cows come home. At the end of the day, the question is going to be, what does the majority of this council consider, and what do they want to do about transit connections, economic development, value for taxpayers? We need to get to the do's, things we're going to do, not to talk about them. I think we all agree, every member of council says that these are all things that are important. These are all part of our plan. Where we may disagree is on how to implement improving economic development, leveraging transit connections. The plan was already made long time ago. We know what the plan is. Every day we talk about the plan. The question is now, are we going to get down and say, what exactly are we going to do with transit connections? We don't have enough hours in the day, weeks in the year to sit down and figure out exactly what that means. So with the greatest of respect, I don't understand what this process is all about. We already have a plan. We already know, everybody knows that one of my biggest issues is bringing the subway to Yonge and Highway 7. That's very important in our transit connections. In economic development, everybody knows that some of us want to see higher and denser intensification. Others of us don't want to see it. So nothing is going to change. The only person who doesn't know what our plan is you, Rebecca. Because the members of council, we all know, I know pretty well where everybody sits on every issue, because we've debated them time after time after time. So with the greatest of respect, I don't understand where we're going to get at the end of this meeting. We're not going to be any further ahead than we were when we started this process.
Okay. Fair enough.
Can I interject, Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
The reason for this, Councilor, because I know we've had a plan that we've been following and commitments. It's because of the current situation we find ourselves in and the difficult decisions that we're having to make as staff to bring forward. But we need to know, what are the priorities of council that must continue over the next 2 years, and what is secondary? What is great if we can afford it, but you're willing to push it out if we can't? Because we are coming up to some very uncertain times that financially, my goal for the city is to be as financially stable and strong as we are right now, 2 years from now, when we hopefully are out of COVID. In order to do that, we have to make hard decisions about the services that we are delivering, potentially not delivering over the next 2 years, delivering in a different fashion. There's a lot of choice for staff, and having a guideline to follow allows us to not waste time going down roads that council may not be supportive of when we get to council. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for what are the top priorities of this council over the next 2 years, and we will make sure that we are focusing our resources on there, because our resources are limited. Remember, we still, I believe, have over 1,000 people on layoff that we have not brought back yet, and financially we can't.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And I think it would be fair
I
to say,
believe-
sorry, can I just respond to what you said earlier? I think what you were saying about we have a plan and everyone knows what it is but me. I would say that the feedback I got from around the council table or council ring doesn't reflect that. I think a couple of you were at one end of the spectrum on that, a couple of you at the other, and many in the middle. So I don't think you can assume that one opinion is necessarily what I heard from everybody. And what I heard from everybody was, is this list our list? Is this really what I'm asking you, I guess, is this your list? Or, you know, do we want to dig deeper into here and say which ones of these, or are there some that are on kind of the secondary list you want to bring forward? So that's really what I'm trying to understand. And using transit as a relatively clear example of something that is not explicitly in a municipal mandate. And yet many of you are saying, as I heard a councillor before you say, we need to be proactive around this. And so when you said we have to talk specifics, I'm actually asking you very specifically, what should this council's plan say about transit? So I'm trying to be as concrete as I can about that.
Right. Well, what Mary Ann was referring to, in my opinion, is about the Sustainability Committee. If Mary Ann, as our city manager, says to us, we need to make some tough decisions, please tell us what those decisions are. Council will give you their opinion on which way, and the majority of council will make that decision. But like I said, you've now done your interviews with all 9 members of council, and you're no further ahead in knowing what direction we want to go. And we can continue this process for another 2 or 3 months, and we're still not going to be any further ahead. What we need to do is staff need to bring to council what the concerns are, what the financial pressures are, and we need to make a decision on which ones we're going to advance and which ones we're not to advance. Because if we're speaking in generalities, we all want to leverage multiple transit connections. We all want to improve economic developments, but these are 30,000 feet questions. And unfortunately, the solutions are here down on the ground. So like I said, I don't understand any of this.
Okay, thanks very much.
Deliver value for money for taxpayers. Who here is opposed to that? Show of hands.
Sir, what I'm asking is that I'm
Who's opposed to creating a place
and let
where
other people have a
want
chance.
to live?
The,
No, I want to know from my colleagues on council, who on council is opposed to improving economic development? The answer is no one. Who on council is opposed to delivering value for money for taxpayers? No one. Who on council is opposed to creating a place people want to live? No one.
I'm going to interrupt
So
you.
this is our
I'm not
plan.
actually asking
This
if
is the
anybody's
plan.
opposed.
So please don't interrupt me. This is the plan. You've already put the plan there. This
Okay.
is the plan. This is what we want to do. Strategic plan complete. This is the plan. Now, let's talk about implementation. That's a totally different story. That's why we have the Sustainability Committee that's going to report back to council and tell us, here's the financial pressures on our plan, of which we have no details. And council needs to make that decision. But our plan is done. As far as I'm concerned, you've already laid it out beautifully. Fantastic.
Council, I just wanted to say with the Sustainability Committee, we've actually finished that process, and it was strictly in relation to capital dollars. We didn't look at operations as part of that process. We look at operations as part of the budget process with the Budget Committee. But
Fantastic. I understand all that, but I'm not hearing any argument from any of my council colleagues when it comes to what our plan is. This is our plan. We want better transit connections. If you agree that this is a good plan, I like it. Pay attention to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Highlight green spaces such as lakes, parks, and I agree with all of these. That's a fantastic plan. All in favor?
The reason you agree is that this is the slide that reflects what everybody said. So that's great. I'm glad that we're in good shape with that. And what I want to do is show you the other list of the ones that some of you talked about, and then ask the whole of council to say, how close are we, in a sense, to the kinds of priorities you do want to see on the plan? So I'm assuming that this slide you can see the different levels of altitude here. Some are very specific. So planning applications are taking too long to get approved. Very specific area to get unstuck, whereas something much broader around create a place people want to live, as Councillor Pirelli noted, it's about implementation at that point. So I did want council at least to see the kinds of things that are being raised as often repeated by you, but also please pay attention to what isn't here, because you would know that better than me about what could have been on the list and didn't appear. Let me show you the other half of the list here, and then we'll dig in more detail. This is the other kind of, if I can call it respectfully, the B list. This came up repeatedly, but not as often as the other list. Some of you talked about really leveraging this idea of being the downtown of the region. And for some of you, you linked that with the transit connectivity, although not all. And others said, this is really a marketing question of, this is way ahead, more than 2 years, but we've got some marketing to do and some promotion to do around this. Some of you said, let's really lean in on efficiency and getting things done, with planning as the example of that, but not the only one. Others of you went higher and said, we're a city that still likes to act like a small town, but we are comparable to some of the best, biggest cities in Canada act like it. You can see some of the other ones there that I think are fairly self-explanatory. So I'll leave that with you. It was in your package. What you probably haven't had as much of a chance to digest, because some of it came through just yesterday and today, is I'll come back to the chat in a second. I just want you to see the updated feedback from the community, and so that you can start to say, is this the same or different than what I would have expected them to say? We had the updated numbers on this, I believe, were 811 responses to the survey that has been out for a couple weeks, closed very recently. You'll notice here that the heavy emphasis on natural environment, subway is there, transportation in other ways in terms of active transportation getting around the city, COVID recovery at about a quarter of the people, and about a third of the people were talking about infrastructure and tax increases. Councillor Pirelli raised the issue of who doesn't want value for money. It wasn't really a question of who doesn't want that, but where this did come up in this survey and also in my conversations with you was, some of you would say, for example, zero tax increase is what we should go for. Others would say below cost of inflation, for example, as was reflected here. So I just wanted you to draw your attention to the similarities and perhaps contrasts between what we heard in the survey and what was coming up in that council priority list, just so that you have another sense of it. I've got two other things to tell you about the survey. In this exact question, this is just the first question, what top 3 priorities, giving them some choices. We have some other open-ended questions, but in this particular one, people were given an opportunity to say others, and that's where we had 439 people given other, which surprised us, because frankly, we were trying to give so many choices in the front end to get fewer choices in the other category, and yet we still had over 400 people give us others. And by far the 2 topics that came up most often was how development and developers are being managed by the city, and also how council itself makes decisions, behaves, treats people, that kind of thing. So I wanted you to see that. And then I'm also looking at some of the other topics that came up. I didn't have a chance to get these in your hands until today because of the the survey closing last minute. Issues around subway came up a lot, specifically just subway, and it just often said subway without describing what about it. Protecting green spaces, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So climate change came up quite prominently. Better community engagement, and city maintenance in terms of downtown improvements, it said. So those, you'll hear more about this as we can process those 800 and some responses, but I wanted you to have a chance to hear the kinds of things that the community were bringing up alongside the things that you were bringing up, so that we can now have a conversation to say, this list of 20, call it 25 things, does not, in my opinion, a plan make. So we have to transfer this into something that looks like a strategy. So I'm curious if you would be willing in the chat to just comment, each of you. I'd love to hear from each of you in the chat. What are your initial reactions to what you've heard thus far, recognizing that some of it would be new to you today and some of it very, very familiar? can you just type in the chat some of your initial responses to what we've experienced in the room thus far in the last 40 minutes or so as we head into what to do with all of this? Curious what's going through your minds. You're also welcome to speak aloud, although I won't be able to give each of you a turn, so I'd ask you to keep your comments brief. I'd love to hear just some initial, what's going through your head right at the moment. Councillor Munch, can I just, in the interest of continuing a conversation while others are typing in the chat, can you give me some context for your comments? Is there a way, are you saying that based on the fact that the environmental priority got such heavy weighting, are you assuming therefore that the survey is skewed? Sure. Sorry, Councillor Munch, I can't hear you. I don't know if you're trying to answer me, but are on mute or maybe didn't hear my question. Do others want to, I'm not seeing anything else either in the chat or aloud. Or is there anybody else that would like to share what's going on? Mr. Mayor, I can see your lips moving. Are you able to unmute yourself?
I can do that.
Thank you. Were you saying something? I'm sorry, I thought I could see you talking.
Oh, I'm talking to myself as to
Sorry.
click chat in the controls at the bottom of the screen.
Fair enough.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I'm sorry. I got my internet just cut out there. I'm so sorry.
There you are. Hello. Welcome back.
I'm sorry. My internet just cut out. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Is that Councillor Munch? I can't see who's speaking. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Hi.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify. I see your comment about being concerned that the survey is skewed. Is that because of the? Are you saying that because the environmental priority figured so highly in the responses?
I think, very tough comment to say, and it's not it's a very tough thing to say. Having said that, is because the numbers that came up were towards a engagement with others and the way the decision was made around planning and the environment. I think some of those people that engaged in that manner are not taking the full context of what we have to do and what our roles are here. And if we're going to be lobbyists and we're going to continue, we have a real benefit, Richmond Hill, with the Oak Ridge Moraine, Yonge Street, and Highway 7. I mean, just a 404. Transportation was brought up earlier. It's such a massive competitive advantage for a lot of urban areas. Now, when people say we want to protect our environment, how do we manage from going from a rural suburban mentality to a new kind of urban from 10 years ago to an urbanized environment and that wants to protect an environment so as to manage the better place.
Sorry, we're struggling with your audio, Councillor Munch. It's cutting in and out.
Yeah, good. Going from the cells.
Sorry, I'll send Councillor Munch a note and I'll invite anybody else that wants to comment at this point to do so, just because we're having trouble with his audio.
Rebecca, I would weigh in on that issue.
Go ahead.
So I don't,
Tell me.
with all due respect to Councillor Munch's perspective, I mean, I think, you know, it's not surprising to me to have seen the environment place so highly in the survey results. And I think when you think about that, I mean, there is a lot of change that's going on in Richmond Hill, and I think that the environment is incredibly foundational to us as a species. I mean, we have to live in a healthy environment, whether it's an urban environment or whether it's a rural environment or whether it's a pristine environment. The environment is still the thing that is at the bottom of everything that we build as a society. So, and there has been an enormous amount of concern that people have with the environment, and particularly during the times that is COVID. I think people are starting to realize how incredibly important our natural environment is, regardless of whether we live in an urban environment or not. So I would fully expect that, you know, doing the very best that we can and spending, you know, the time and the thought and resources on doing what we can to make sure that we have a better natural environment now than we did before is foundational to any strategic plan. And, you know, the past that we've had in Richmond Hill has always had a focus on maintaining the environment. A lot of that has to do with the natural heritage that we are blessed with in the Oak Ridges Moraine area, but you know, the parks, the open spaces, the valley lands, you know, all of that is really important to people. And I hear this every day, either explicitly or implicitly. So to me, that would be, you know, that would have to be a focus, and doing better even than we are now has to be part of any strategic plan.
Okay, thanks very much. Folks, if I could have you look at the slide that I've put up for you, and I'm wondering if Sorry. Oh, hi, Councilor Schubach. Just a second.
Yeah, so I've changed my.
Yeah, your
I'm
audio is
sorry.
going as if you've got two devices going, so I'll let you work
Yeah,
that out.
yeah.
Folks, in the meantime, if you could have a look at the question I have for you. If number 10 is a lot, very much, right, and 0 is not at all, I'm curious if the survey results surprise you, because obviously when you look at them, you're going to interpret them very differently than I am. And even as this little exchange just showed, someone might read them and go, yep, that makes sense. And somebody else might say, oh, I think these are skewed. So I'm curious, I won't know by looking at the survey results how you interpret them. So can you say if they are surprising to you? I'd like to see a number out of 10 in the chat. To what extent are you surprised or not surprised by the survey results? And then if you've got additional comments around that, you can put them in the chat since we're struggling with some audio for some people. How are you interpreting the survey, including saying, you know, you don't consider the survey to be legitimate for whatever reasons, or you do, or you're surprised by it, whatever. I'd really love to know how you're reading this survey of 811 responses. So far, I've seen not surprised at all, quite important. Anybody else? To be honest, I'm a little bit curious because I'm trying to give you easy ways to participate, and I'm only hearing from a couple of you. So I'd love to hear from everybody if we could.
If I can just finish my point.
Yep, go ahead.
I don't think anybody, and if I'm wrong, chime in, is going to say the environment's not important. I think it's really, we all, as I said earlier, the Oak Ridges Moraine, Yonge Street, our mix here is a competitive difference. And we all have to understand that the growth plan and the green belt have to coexist. And when we start to renegotiate or attempt to renegotiate to say one against the other, that's where I think we're missing some context. And for as a strategic plan going forward, if we want to meet our growth and economic and prosperity, and we want to help enhance our environment, protect our environment, and keep our green belt, then let's put a strategic plan that does that. When we start saying that wedging that one point of view or one aspect of what we do as a municipality, we must focus on that as a priority. If that's what we're going to say as a strategic plan, then let's say that. If someone says, if the environment is the sacrosanct of everything we do, bar none, and we'll talk about not potentially meeting our growth targets, or we don't really matter about how we get this transit investment for intensification, then let's as a council say that. But I think when we start saying that we're actively saying we want the environment, we want intensification, but we're really not going to implement both, it's not going to help us achieve the objectives that I don't believe that all levels of government, York Region and the province, are expecting of us. And I think that's where I don't think anybody here, I'm hoping that we can show senior level skills here, where we have skilled labor, where we can talk about people saying, what are the priorities? What is our strategic plan as a structure going forwards as a priority document? Not are we for the environment, against the environment? My point of view, as I'm saying, is that when you see a particular frame of reference come forward, I think the weight of that coming forwards from that select group may be more than some of the other areas. And that's why I believe those numbers may be skewed. If we as a council, others disagree with that, fair enough. Then let's bring it forward, say we're going to make this as a priority, we'll make our stance and we'll run on that. But let's not sugarcoat this and say this is about an anti-growth or anti-investment or anti-environment. I think we deserve much, much more. And I think, Rebecca, we have to give staff an opportunity as a council. Let's make a stance. Let's go on.
Sure.
There it is.
And I think, I would just bring to the attention of all of council that the question hopefully was not phrased, it wasn't phrased as, are you for or against the environment? It was specifically asking, where should council give its priority? So we have to figure that out. And what I hear Councillor Munch saying is to find those places where the growth plan and the green belt requirements would intersect as one possible way of framing this. Ryan, can I trouble you to launch that other poll? Because I'd like to lean into this survey a little bit, partly because as we develop the strategy, we need to understand how much weight you want to give it. And so you'll see this second question. Could these results shift your thinking about the priorities you would have recommended or not? Some of you said you weren't surprised. I didn't hear from a lot of you on that. I'm curious how much weight you're giving these survey results is really what I'm asking. And I'm curious about whether these results would shift the way that you would weight the list of possible priorities or not.
Thank you.
If I may, can I interject something?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And please, Rebecca, let me know if I misheard this or not, but at the beginning of our meeting, I heard it being said that basically what you want from us over the next 2 years of this term is our input as we're doing right now, but a new strategic plan is actually only going to come to the council of the next term and be voted on by the council of the next term. Did I hear that right?
Marion, can I ask you to weigh in on that? I want to make sure I get the wording right, so I'll pass it over to you if you don't mind.
Councillor, yes, that is correct. This is about a 2-year plan to identify council's priorities. We did the community survey so that you had feedback from the community to help you make those choices, because I will say we will be bringing things forward. We're doing a lot of analysis internally, but we cannot operate the way we are operating right now long-term and maintain our financial position. It's just not feasible unless the other levels of government are going to continue to interject money into the city. So we're looking at what are the top priorities of council to focus on just over the next 2 years. We're not saying we're not going to do everything else, but we are going to have to make some hard decisions by maybe keeping things closed longer, making some adjustments on our service levels, those types of things. So what I need to know and what staff need to know, it's not about decision by decision of council. a lot of the things we do at the city, what you don't see behind the scenes is we're planning that out 2, 3, months in advance, because there's a lot of moving parts that we have to work on. And I don't want to waste our limited resources going down roads that council may not support. So this gives us an idea of where council puts the priority and emphasis so that we can make those decisions and not waste time, because we still are on limited staffing right now.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. And that's exactly what I thought, because really what we need to do here is set realistic objectives and goals. And I get that. So the only thing I would like to just interject here is that perhaps the framing, and with all respect to Rebecca and all the hard work that you have done together with Marianne and Kathleen, perhaps the framing of this needs to be tweaked, because if and Mayor Barrow, if you could join in here as well, I'm quite comfortable giving my opinion and saying what it is, how I believe we should move forward as a council in the best interests of our city and our community and our residents with regards to what a strategic plan means. But perhaps what we're looking at here is two parts. We're looking at initial recovery and moving forward in what we have to do over the next 2 years with regards to COVID, because it will definitely continue over the next 2 years. And then move to defining a new strategic plan for the city in the next term. Because I can guarantee you, whatever we put forward now in this term as this council, as our ideas, this council's ideas, or the majority decision of this council's ideas for a strategic plan, when it gets into the hands of a new term council, there's going to be differentiating opinions. So I don't want all the work that we do here and now to just be, brushed aside or go by the wayside. So perhaps what we should be doing here is a two-part more, and I know you've basically said that we're concentrating on the next 2 years and then we look at the strategic plan. But I don't believe that we can be looking at a strategic plan for the next term of council with this term of council. So what we need to be doing is deciding on what we need to do to help Richmond Hill recover and continue to be effective in everything that we do during a public health emergency pandemic. Those are just my thoughts. And sorry, I don't mean to go on. I'm just trying to get out what's in my head here. And I don't want us to be bifurcating here. We need to concentrate on one thing with this council.
That's all we planned on doing. That's what this exercise was. I was just saying, this isn't a community strategic plan that's going to have a long lifespan. It's how do we get through the next 2 years in light of the unprecedented time we're in right now. I can give you an example. We have limited funds and resources. So if growth and development is a key priority, then we're going to have to shift resources there and maybe put off finishing the official plan. Or maybe those two go together. There's choices we have to make. I'm skating in unknown waters. But there's choices that we have to make as staff, and we're just looking for some guidance on what are the top priorities of council.
Agreed, but don't you think, Marianne, that and Rebecca, and the mayor, don't you think that will also come through in our budget discussions that are going to happen in the fall and the new year? Because that becomes a part of our budget planning as well, and what we have to do in the next 2 years in order for us to get through what we have to get through. I just don't want us to be looking at parallel railway tracks here or parallel pillars. I think this all needs to be joined together so that we formulate one idea, one objective for a very broad strategy because we're not living in the world that we were living in before. So I so appreciate what is being done here, Rebecca, and you've done a great job. But even if our focus is the next 2 years, this council, our focus is the next 2 years, then even the survey, with all respect, that went out to the public did not say that. And maybe what we need is greater public input in how the public would like to see us maneuver through the next 2 years that are going to be very, very difficult and will become very, very apparent as we move forward.
Those are good points. Let me just add, Rebecca, to that is that, and like we were saying, this does feed into the budgets. We have very difficult, we have big decisions to make. For example, I'll give you another example of a choice we have to make. If we're not, do we open up all of our facilities? Do we continue to open up facilities? And there's going to be increased costs. There's increased costs on staffing. There's increased costs to open them up in accordance with the guidelines. There's lower participation, so we're not getting in the revenue. So what is council, is that one of the top priorities? Because if that's one of the top priorities, then some of the other initiatives, and we have a significant number of initiatives across the city that have been council directed. We can't do them all over the next 2 years. So we're putting our budgets together and trying to get down to the guidelines of a 0.5% increase, but we need to know where to go. We need to know what's really important to council and the community moving forward so that we can say, we're just gonna put this on the shelf for a while, or maybe we're not gonna open up all of our recreation facilities because we'd need a 5% tax increase to do so. But these are the questions that we're looking at internally and we'll be bringing forward to council for decisions.
And not only that, you're absolutely right, Mary. And not only that, we will be guided by public health necessities, right? We will be guided as to what happens in the fall, what happens in the winter, what happens with the vaccine, and how do we move forward in the next 2 years to try and, for everybody in the whole wide world to get back to what we call normal, should that ever come about again. I'm beginning to doubt it, but it's
I'm going to intervene here so that we can, in fact, get to what it is that you were just suggesting. So as you mentioned, it's really important that we focus our attention on these next 2 years.
Exactly.
I just want to note that the poll we just launched about whether your thinking will shift or not. I'll show you the results real quickly, but we only got 4 people voting in it. So I want you to notice that that this is only based on 4 of you. So I don't want to put a lot of stock in it when we have less than half of council voting, but I wanted you to at least see those results. But what I want to do is move on from, if we were talking about, here's what we heard, I want to really hear from you again today, now that you've got all of that background to put in the hopper and go, okay, what should we do? So I have 4 questions for you. And I would really appreciate hearing from each and every councillor that's on the call in response to each of these 4 questions in the chat. Because if we start doing it out loud, we will run out of time because I can't hear from all of you on every question. But if we're looking at 4 questions here in the chat, first one is this: the top 3 most impactful results council could achieve in the next 2 years are. So what is it that you're trying to do in the next 2 years that you say, in that time, here's the impact we could have? Can you please give us a sense of that in the chat? And you're welcome to do that to everyone or just to me. We will be collating this at the end. So I've heard from one of you. Thank you for that. Councillor Slivets, can I push you a little bit to say what should those realistic goals be? That's actually what we're going for here. So if I can push a little more detail there, that would be very helpful. those of us that are going to be trying to draft this plan and bring it back to you for comment are going to need a little more direction, I think. I'm just not hearing from very many of you. So I'd really appreciate, I don't know if you're thinking or typing slowly, but I'd love to hear more detail.
Will do. I will type some more.
Thank you.
I'm responding to what extent might these results shift your thinking about priorities you'd recommend for the next
No,
2
sorry.
years?
Folks, are you seeing my slide right now? Yeah, you're actually responding to the question on the slide, Councillor Munch. Are you able to see that? It says the top 3 most impactful results council could achieve in the next 2 years.
Oh, I'm sorry, my mistake.
No worries.
I'll move that. Thank you.
Thanks. Folks, can I get a little bit of, it's harder online than it is in person to read what's going on in the room. I'm not getting anything in the chat right now. I've had one comment from Councillor West and one from Councillor Silovitz, and that's all. And I'm wondering, are you thinking and typing, or is there something else going on?
I'm typing. If I may, perhaps, the mayor or Marianne should ask who's still on this, because if you're only getting 3 or 4 people responding via the chat, then are all council members still connected here?
We're able to see who's here from the list of participants, but I can't see who's necessarily choosing to engage in the questions.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And just a note on that, everybody can see who's on the call if you want to by clicking participants across the bottom of your screen.
Hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillors, I can't move on to the next question until I'm confident that I've heard from all of you that I'm going to hear from on this question, and I'm not really hearing a lot right now. So I need some guidance as to whether we're ready to move on or how
I need 25 seconds more.
Yep, thanks for that. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Liu, those are the folks I can see. Are you guys all right? Are you digging in when you can?
Yes, could you so we have to list 3 priorities. Is it what we are doing right now?
Yes. Are you able to see my slide where it says the top 3 most impactful results you could achieve in the next 2 years would be? If you had to pick 3 results you're trying to achieve or top 3 priorities, you could frame it that way.
Okay.
And from what you've heard today, what would you say they are? From the lists we've given you or from other things? Just I'd like to hear how your thinking is shifting on this at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the next question because it might influence how you answer this. The next one is related to it, but it's a little bit different. Specifically, to be positively positioned on the other side of COVID, what do you have to be doing? So if this were a COVID-focused plan in that sense, would your answer change at all? What is COVID asking of you, particularly here? Anything at all? Would we be able to have an oral discussion about this if folks are struggling to type things? I'm curious what your sense is of what's the so what of COVID for Richmond Hill. That's really what I'm asking. Does anyone want to say anything out loud about that?
Well, as I said before, I think that whatever we do now and into the immediate future is going to be dictated by COVID, by the public health emergency, and how everything, what is going to happen in the next 2 years. I think it's right at the top of the pyramid.
Short of the, requirement, and my assumption is that you will, abide by public health guidelines, but I'm curious, as leaders in your community, what is that leading you to say we have to do? So, is there anything in particular? Part of why we're having this conversation is that the world literally has turned topsy-turvy since the beginning of your term of council. And I'm wondering what the "and therefore" is for you. That's what this whole day is about, is what's the context has shifted. What therefore does that mean for your leadership in your community? And
Yes, I'd like to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just saying that, from the COVID point of view, this was brought up on us as in a fast way in a lot of areas. We are dealing through the region of York and the health department there. We are generating directions from the province, as we did the other night, or Saturday morning process. We're working in all of the ways that we can protect our citizens, we can protect our business people, and we're working very, very. I've proudly for our staff the work that they've done for keeping our community in know, but also keeping them in a safe place in the community. So we've been doing that, and it's changing all the time. And we've had great discussions, amongst ourselves, but also through the very areas that we're working on in the COVID place. But when you think of it, as I said, it's driven by the province, which again I do say. They've been giving us the opportunities to move some things and change some things and have an opportunity to make a safe process to the next line. We went from 1 to 2 to 3, and I think the second one's coming over the hill in Richmond Hill, and we're still working through that process. But we're doing it as a team, quite frankly, and I think that. From that point of view, I believe then we are positively positioned.
So in terms of what I hear the mayor and Councillor Slovitz saying is around making sure that you are compliant with the guidelines that you're receiving from public health, from the province, and doing the adapting that you need to do for that. Fair, and to the extent that is going on and that there's constant adaptation happening, is there anything else anyone else wants to say that along the lines of what the city manager brought to us, therefore we might have to what? Like what are some of is there any kind of guidance you'd like to give your staff to say, therefore certain things have to bump up the priority list and other things might have to be put on hold as a result? It's that kind of weighting, relative balancing that they really need your guidance on, to say, man, like for example, let me give you some stories from other municipalities. Some are saying our entire focus, I was in a meeting yesterday with the council that said, we are focusing on the recovery of our downtown local businesses. Someone else said, we are focusing on attracting new big commercial clients to fill some of our empty office spaces. We are dialing back. Marianne mentioned we're not going to open as many recreational facilities as we thought, although we wish we could. Somebody else said we're doing parks like crazy because at least people can get outside. So it's those kinds of conclusions that I'm wondering if your council has any preferences even about your COVID response, because I'm assuming that your compliance with provincial and public health guidelines is just a given. Over and above that, in terms of leadership, what's the plan?
I will weigh in when the time comes, Rebecca. Dave, I'm sorry to interrupt you though.
No, thank you. I think you can go ahead. Oh, sorry, Mayor Barrett, did you want to finish your thought?
Yes, thank you. So the point there being was, as you're saying, we have been doing all of that. We have more than one or two things that we've moved into and we're working on and we're trying to build and develop. We've done an amazing job on the business community here in our community. So and we're there until the world changes. So I think that's the whole point. There's not one or two things that you can do. Every day we do something different and we move it differently and staff deals with it. And so I think this is something that, you kind of set aside to say, boy, oh boy, we were working on the plan one day and all of a sudden COVID took over. So, I don't know whether I think we should, put any more bicycle areas to ride or dog things or whatever the case is right now. People will do it. People do it. You don't have to take their hand. They'll do it. But I think that from our point of view, there's not one or two things that we can, like in the past areas that we've had key performance indicators on maybe 5 or 6 areas, that we thought were important, that the community priorities, or they were things that we were working on various areas in the community. So as I said, I find this difficult to put together with the strategic plan at this point in time.
Okay.
Because we have a plan for this that we never ever thought was coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've responded directly at it without any thought of where can we go, what can we do, and so as I say, we've seen it all, and the Premier's day, every day we see him, and what's happening and how it's being done. So I think like somehow you can't separate COVID from our strat plan at this point in time, but the same token is, I think it's not I don't believe it's a big matter in our strategic plan at this point in time. If we're going to for 2 years, I'm going to still be sitting in this room I'm sitting in right now, looking out the same window. I truly believe that I'll be here 2 years doing that too.
Councillor West?
And I'll change my shirt and I'll do it.
We were going to mention that. No. Councillor West, what were you going to say?
So I maybe this is a somewhat of an echo of what Mayor Bear was saying, and so the question to be positively positioned on the other side of COVID, we must. So obviously we need to be very fiscally responsible. In fact, more so than we have been before. We have to think of things that we've never thought of before. I mean, and we have been doing that. I mean, we have shut down facilities that clearly we're going to have nobody in them, and we've saved costs to ameliorate the risks that were there by spending money for a facility that wasn't going to be used, and those were great, and we need to continue to do that. And and it's not going to be a straight line. There's going to be ups and downs, and I agree with Mayor Barrow. This is going to go on for a while. It's not going to be over tomorrow. But I think at the same time, we need to be making investments in our community. We have a community where our residents do expect a good level of community that they live in, and they deserve that, and we want to be able to deliver that. But there are things that we can do and investments that we can make. I mean, Recover Richmond Hill is a good example of that. Our economic development task force. I mean, we didn't have to do that, I suppose, but I mean, it was an absolutely good idea to do it. And frankly, I think we should be looking at doing more of that kind of thing to support our local businesses. And I think the results of that task force were good. And, we're implementing those things, but we need to do more of that kind of thing. And those are investments in the community. We're not, saving money, so to speak. We're actually spending money, investing in the health and well-being of the businesses that we need to be strong in our community. There are not-for-profit groups operating in our community, and we don't have an infinite ability to invest in every single one of them, but there are some strategic partnerships that I'm sure we should be looking into to be supporting those not-for-profits. I mean, the arts and culture community has made life in many ways bearable during the COVID crisis. We're not out of it yet. I'm sure that sector will be, helping to keep us entertained and so on. And we need to be looking at doing what we can to invest in those. parks and green space. I mean, it's never been more important than it is now. I mean, the parks and the green space are very busy right now. Our active transportation networks, our trails, our, all those types of things. People's attitudes are changing because of COVID, but there's going to be some probably good habits from the terms of physical fitness and active transportation formed. We should take that opportunity to be investing in those types of infrastructure. So, I mean, while we do need to be fiscally responsible, I hope that it's not going to all be about, not investing in the community and waiting for the storm to pass. That's not what we're doing right now. So those are the things that we need to do. But again, I just wanted to reiterate that from my perspective, those kinds of things are what a responsible council would do. So some of them aren't even, they're kind of motherhood and apple pie type statements. I mean, they're givens. And so the way I see it is that the strategic plan, I think, really needs to focus on some of the really visionary types of things, not maintaining our roads and infrastructure. I mean, we're going to do that. We need to be looking at things that make us great, not good. And there are opportunities right now to move us forward. So I think that's the very long answer to this question from my perspective.
And I appreciate you keeping your comments brief, but when you think about those things that would make the city great, not good, can you give me an example of one that you would love to see kind of on the radar?
Inclusivity. There's a lot of stuff going on right now about, making sure that every single person that is here, whether they're long-term residents or new residents, are feeling comfortable, are being treated with dignity and respect. I mean, we can go into that as long as you want, but probably that's enough for this moment. I think there is having a rich cultural environment. I mean, arts and cultural environment, I think, is incredibly important. And right now is a good time to invest to make sure we come out stronger, but also make sure that a lot of those cultural groups just don't go away. And it's the same thing with the business environment, right? We want to have lots of strong businesses. We want to have lots of, like restaurants, for example. We don't want those to go away. And so the Recover Richmond Hill Task Force was a way for us to be able to support those businesses, those kinds of things in the strategic plan. I mean, those are the things that are going to help us come out the other side of this better. And I would hope that we would take the opportunity to invest in those things, even though it may cost a little bit of money up front to do it, but it's definitely a long-term investment that will pay off in the end.
Thanks for that. One other question, I said 4, but one of them will overlap with some things we've already talked about. So let's jump ahead to this one. So what are the things that you would say you need to put less emphasis on then? Because I'm hearing from some of you saying, a lot of the stuff we just carry on and do. It's going to happen. It's just part of the core business of the city. And yet I'm also hearing we've got some choices to make, difficult choices, as Marianne has brought to us. So I'm curious if some of your earlier answers about what you want to push and lean in on, what are some of the things you'd say it's necessary for us to pull back on? Can we have a few moments in that, both in the chat and out loud, please? You are a quiet bunch today. I thought that I was afraid we would have so much going on, we wouldn't be able to get through all the questions. And yet there hasn't been, I realize that some of you are sort of struggling with the task, but I would have thought that maybe this piece would be something that you'd have to give some thought to. What are some of the things that you're going to be willing to say important, but not right now?
I'm really not sure how to answer this one.
Okay.
It just stymies me because I'm am not sure what is less important.
Mhm. And maybe that's the challenge of this whole exercise, right? I mean, if strategic planning is about choices and yet you are a local government that feels that everything you do is important, and it is, maybe you've kind of put your finger right on the thing that's the hardest thing about municipal strategic planning, right? Is can you actually make any choices? And yet, vote by vote, you each make choices every day. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? I'm not seeing any answers other than Councillor Solovet's saying understandably that this is a really hard question. But I did hear Marianne saying there will be some hard choices to be made, and ultimately the staff could make them, but I think that many of you want to show leadership in this area. So what are some of the ways that you're going to say, well, I need to heavily prioritize this, and therefore the trade-off is that?
I've gone on, finally got it typed out in time. However,
Hit enter.
my thought simply is the fact of here we are, it's financial times. And that's what's been, has been something that's very important to us. And we've spent a lot of time as a council, at the very beginning, we were trying to help our people out by, saying they didn't have to pay their taxes bill until the end of the year and things like that. So these things are all happening to us in various ways. And so all I put in here is that, somewhere along this way, this is the issue, the financials, but some of it, which one should be spent, I should say, and which one should be held back until we, something changes in our financials in some way. That's where I think it is. But I again, we don't have a list of all the things that we have. So to say, oh, well, I don't need that one. I don't think we need that anymore. And as Councillor David said, yeah, there's lots of things in each of our areas. So for us to sit here and say, well, you're only going to do it for 2 years. B, we don't have a list of things, but here's what we think, we should, here's what, what things wouldn't you do? I would say we would do the things we can't afford. And we'll spend what we have to spend for a community. But we can't keep adding it on. We can't build another community center somewhere in the next 2 years. We can't, things like that. Things that are like, multi-million dollars. They're needed in the community. There's no question about it. But this is the time where we have to choose. It's just like every individual and every household, Here's the money, dear. Here's the list. So what are we going to spend it on? That's exactly where we are in this city.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm asking you to answer the question in terms of, not to, like, I hear you saying we have, it's time to choose where to spend the money. That's exactly what strategy does, is it helps you set your budget, right? It helps you decide on priorities. It helps you direct your team. And
but
encourage.
Okay.
But I see what you're saying, that, what I'm hearing, and I framed this earlier like this, and maybe we're back at it, is saying, I get the sense from some of you that it's vote by vote. Like you put an actual concrete choice in front of me. Do you want to spend money on this thing? Decide in the moment. Am I hearing that correctly?
Oh, I'm saying that, yes.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we have to, at this point in time, what, you're asking. I don't think you're asking the question of, okay, we won't hire any more firemen, we won't build any more community centers, and whether, as we said before, on the community priorities of things, I don't think that we're in a position at this point in time to name 3 or 4 things that we're not going to do this year or possibly in the next 2 years, because, as I said, we're caught up in the new world we live in, and I can't, I don't see. And I was reading some of the other stuff for the comparison reports.
Yep.
from the other municipalities. It's very interesting. They're not far off as we are. You know, and so it's very interesting as to who, you know, I'm just saying to you, I don't know what we,
Fair.
I don't know what we, if we have any money, I'm not sure what my choice may be. Maybe that's the point. Then we look at 9 choices or 709 choices that we had would be the ones that the community, because it's to say, it's community priorities. We ask them what they want or what they would like to do, and whatever answer you get is the answer you get. And then the point then is, you know, that there's a vision about all these things that you have to kind of, this is one of your words, I think, in the very first time we talked was, you know, putting visions into action. So doing that is something that it's hard. I'm because of no, I say I think we're caught in the middle of this at this time, maybe, but it doesn't prevent us from doing things, and it doesn't prevent us for putting more and more people are moving in to Richmond. Well, actually, people don't believe it, but we actually there's more people moved into Richmond Hill than the other 9 areas of this year. It's not a regular role that we have here, but you know, that's been happening. So there's more and more people here.
Mhm.
And so therefore there's more and more amenities that they want to have and deserve when you purchase a home, you know, that type of stuff. So
Rebecca,
again, that in the performance indicators that we can put in place to make sure that we you know, we're following along. We kind of don't wheel away from it, and you know, we're going to choose, if we choose something, that's what we got to stick with.
Well, I guess that's part of what I'm struggling with, frankly, Mr. Mayor, is I don't, right now, if I had to sit down and write something, I wouldn't have any idea which performance indicators to put into place if the so-called approach is vote by vote will decide, which is fair, but yet I just want to manage expectations that there really can't be performance indicators and a vote by vote approach to strategy. They don't go together. Either there's this is what we think good performance as a city looks like, or there's we'll decide choice by choice. But I just want to make sure that we're clear that it's very difficult to do both if we're not being given any particular way forward. And some of you have, so I don't want to imply that we have nothing, but I'm conscious of the fact that we're only hearing from 2 or 3 councils today. And so I don't have a lot of strong sense of mandate or legitimacy to write something coming out of today that feels like it is a council directive that might help staff. So I'm a little bit curious around that. I think Marianne, were you hoping to say something?
Yes, you would.
Did you disappear? Oh, there you are. Hello.
hi, I was just going to add to what the mayor's saying. It's just about choices, but we can look at what we've collected so far and bring something back for consideration. Because like I said, we have a lot of decisions to make, and we don't want to spend a lot of time going down areas that council would not deem as important as others. So I think we're good.
Okay. Would anybody else in that sense like to make any final comments today before?
I would.
Go ahead, Councillor West.
Okay, thank you. So one thing that we haven't, that I think is an opportunity right now, and that I think would be very helpful for our community. I mean, we've got this time where, you know, we're kind of, to use a sailing term, we're kind of hove to, and, you know, we're going to be huddled up in the cabin, you know, to some degree, you know, but I think that there's work still to be done. And one of the things that I would really like to see happen as much as possible, and I understand the challenges, is there are a number of big plans right now that we started just before all this happened, and we have not completed them. And you know, there is a public component to those plans, and I fully respect the fact that I don't want to be creating a foundational plan without sufficient and robust public opinion, because that's very, very important. But one of them is our comprehensive zoning bylaw plan that we've been working on. One of them is, I presume we're going to need a new fire master plan in the next little while, and the official plan are all being worked on. And, you know, I've checked in with staff. I know that we're moving forward with those plans, but I mean, you know, I can't believe that there wouldn't be opportunities during this storm that we couldn't make some progress on some aspects of those plans, so that you know, when the time comes where we can have the final, you know, consultation from the public, we get that consultation and then the plan is almost done. So we come out of this with a you know, using the time that we've had during this COVID pandemic to actually make some positive changes to that landscape. And that's something that I think is very important. And you know, whatever resources we need to give staff to make that happen, you know, as much as it possibly can during this time, I think we should be absolutely doing that. You know, we are growing as a city, and I think probably our council will agree that one of the more contentious issues that comes up on this council is development applications. And I find it very difficult to navigate this with the residents that I represent, because, you know, in some respects, we need plans that are fresh and updated and are, you know, going to be taken seriously, because I don't think right now that's sometimes the case. And I think this is an opportunity to make some forward progress on that particular aspect. As I said, I alluded to before, I think there's also opportunities for us to do some of the environmental work and environmental planning that we should be doing. I mean, any municipality should be doing, and this would probably be a good time to do some of that legwork. So I would hope we would do that. And then, of course, you know, I mean, I think in my mind, one of the main rationales or outcomes of this plan would be, because it's such a short time frame, is to get that, you know, COVID recovery happening. But I think ultimately the final goal of this should be a setup for the next term of council, very early in that term of council, to do a refresh on the 2008-2009 strategic plan. Because in my opinion, a 2-year strategic plan has limited value, whereas a much longer time frame that outlasts terms of council is the guiding document for the community. And I think that really would be an outcome. So maybe this strategic plan really is the layup for the final strategic plan, or the longer term strategic plan that would happen in 2022 or thereabouts.
Yeah, very much the intention. Folks, I'm going to wrap things up shortly, but if you have, and thank you to those of you that have been sending me additional notes in the chat, we will certainly incorporate them into the considerations for a draft plan that will come your way. If anyone else has any comments that they'd like to make, either in the chat or out loud right now, it would be a very good time to do it.
If I may, Rebecca, thank you. Yeah, and I completely agree with what Councillor West was saying, and goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that we've got the next 2 years to look at, and then the next 4 years to look at. So I think we need to compartmentalize that as effectively and efficiently as we can. Just the one thought I would like to close with is this, and that is, I am waiting, of course, to see what comes up in our upcoming budget discussions, both capital and operating. But I do believe, and this is very close to my core, I do believe what we need to be looking at over the next 2 years is to become very Robin Hoodish, if I may, very socialistic. We need to look at what's the best we can do for our residents in times of such incredible need. And that's financial. It is with regards to mental health and wellness as well. And that's where our leadership lies. That's where our leadership should be. And we're always, again, Robin Hoodish, instead of always taking money from our residents, because we have to with regards to taxes and taxation, but perhaps in this time of abject need, we need to be looking at what we can do and how we can do it best to give back, to assist those who need our help on the municipal level. There are provincial programs and federal programs that can kick in as well, but on a very very micro level, that's what our municipality needs to do. There are so many out there who are in need on so many different levels. So I for me, once our budgets discussions begin and we start getting our staff reports and direction and recommendation from staff and from finance and from all the different departments, then I think we'll be able to have a much clearer vision about what it is that we can do. We may not be able to effectively bring in that much, but I think we should look at, without negatively impacting our public coffers, we should also be looking at how we can truly help those in need in the business community and those who are residents, not necessarily in the business community, but also the residents as well. We need to give back in a time of need, because we're always taking, as we should and we have to as a public organization, but we also need to see what we can do to effectively help our residents and our businesses. That's all. Thank you so much.
Mr. Mayor, I will turn it over to you for the last word, and I don't know if Marianne has something else to say, but I really appreciate, thank you everybody for your input. We will take that back and use it to move this process forward to the next step. So thank you very much.
Okay, yes. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rebecca. I think you were doing very well in trying to steer us through the process that we were not quite sure where we were in. So I don't know whether Marianne wishes to make any comments at this time.
No, I think this has been a good exercise. We've heard from council. We've got some information. I think in the next steps, when we bring forward priorities that we're going to take from everything we heard and recommendations we're going to make, we're going to be considering our financial affordability and long-term sustainability on where we feel we should be focusing the next 2 years, and not making any changes or cuts, and where are the areas that we're going to have to make change, that we're going to recommend making changes to. Like you said, it's really hard for you to pick those out because you don't know what exactly we're looking at, because we look at, every direction of council over the last 2 years is part of our work plan, plus our regular work plan, that just to keep the city running on the day-to-day stuff. So that was a very fair statement. I forget who made it, but we will bring forward some recommendations in line with what we've heard from the community and what we've heard today on where we're going to have to where we recommend making changes for next year in light of more than likely second wave of COVID. Thank you.
Yes, unfortunately. Thanks for putting that in. But so thank you very much, and and thanks members of council. And at this point in time, I would call for a proceedings of the meeting of bylaw to confirm the proceedings in bylaw 12220. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor West, Councillor Silovitz. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you all very much. We just need a plain old same old mover and seconder for an adjournment of this meeting. And we will say goodbye. Thank you. Thank you all.